CHUD is impossible to say any other way. You have to say it like this: CHUD. What is a CHUD? A cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller. But, as we'll see later on, it might just stand for something else. CHUD opens up with someone walking their dog late at night. She drops the poop bag, and something comes up from the sewer and attacks, taking her, and of course, the dog too. The next day, we see the streets of New York City in 1984. Graffiti everywhere, homeless people, and a street sweeper, which cleans up all the evidence from the attack to the lady and the dog. That bird better watch out. It's gonna get sucked up. Whew, flew off just in time. Now we meet George Cooper and his wife Lauren. He's a photographer and she's a model, but he seems more interested in taking pictures of homeless people that live around the area. You see, that's what gave him his big break. He did a special piece on all the people who live on the streets, and apparently it made him rich and famous. Anyway, they just moved here and Lauren goes to the basement where most of their stuff is still in storage. She gets some jewelry for a photo shoot, and while she's down there, something's scratching at an entrance to the sewer. Now we meet Captain Bosch, working at a busy police station. It seems like right now there are a ton of missing persons reports, but he's being told to ignore them and move on to more important things. But something doesn't quite sit right. Elsewhere in the station, an old homeless lady is picked up for trying to steal an officer's handgun. When asked why she did it, well, she isn't talking. They give her one phone call, and she decides to call Cooper. I'm not really sure why. I guess because he took pictures of her for his piece and now they're friends. Anyway, in the middle of his wife's photo shoot, he checks his voicemail and rushes over to the police station, leaving Lauren high and dry. While they wait on George to come get the lady, they get another tip on some more missing persons in the area. This time, Bosch goes to look into it for himself. The guy who made the report is A.J. Shepard, aka Marv from Home Alone. And Cooper is played by John Hurd, the dad from Home Alone. You think someone watched CHUD and thought, hey, those two guys should play in a beloved Christmas movie together. At least that's how I like to think it happened. Hey, you wouldn't have Home Alone if it wasn't for CHUD.
Tell that kid! Why'd you take your shoes off? Why'd you dress like a chicken?
Anyway, Bosch goes over to talk to AJ, who runs a soup kitchen for the homeless. He tells him that over the past couple days, all of his regulars that live underground have gone missing. Just out of the blue. They're not coming up to eat anymore. And he's starting to get worried. There's only one guy left who lives down there, Val. When they go to talk to him, well, he's nuts. Not much help there. He does sort of attack the captain with a knife, and he wonders why he had a knife in the first place. AJ informs him that all the underground people have knives or guns now, but he doesn't really know why. Cooper picks up the old lady from the station, whose name is Mrs. Monroe, by the way, and she leads him down deep into the sewer to her brother Victor, who needs some help. He's the one who asked Mrs. Monroe to steal a gun so he could have some protection, but again, we don't know from what. Victor has more important things to worry about, however, because he's been injured, and it's not looking good for him. Back to AJ and Bosch, who hopes AJ would recognize some of the people in Cooper's article. AJ wonders why a captain of a precinct would be so involved in a couple missing homeless people. That's when Bosch fesses up that his wife is also missing. So it turns out she's the one from the beginning that was walking the dog. Hearing this, AJ starts working with the captain to help him get some answers. In the photos, they see Mrs. Monroe and her brother, seeing George's name attached to all the pictures, they make a mental note to look out for him. AJ, having answered all of the captain's questions, now asks about an EPA probe. He says that usually people go down there for a week, scope the place out, and then leave for another year, but they've been down there for a month, and they're still down there. AJ convinces Bosch to go down and take a look. They find the leg of a hazmat suit and even a Geiger counter that's reading hot. So whatever's down there is radioactive. Real quick, we go over to George, who's coming home after a hard day of walking through the sewers. But remember, he bailed out on his wife's photo shoot. I thought he was going to get an earful, but no, it's the opposite actually. Lauren informs him that she's pregnant. So I think that's a good thing. I mean, George has already proven to be an irresponsible husband, leaving her high and dry and not answering the phone when his boss calls, and just in general, he's not really father material. Out on the streets, some guy's walking around with his granddaughter, and he goes into a phone booth to call for directions. And we get our first quick glimpse at a CHUD. It's only a second, but it does get things going. The grandfather's killed, while the girl goes to the police station for help. All she can say is that a monster attacked them. Bosch doesn't necessarily believe her, but this is the final straw for him, and he demands a meeting with the commissioner. When he refuses, Bosch threatens to go to the media, so reluctantly, they agree. Bosch and AJ meet with them and bring all the evidence that they found on their trek down to the sewers, which the commissioner just blows off, saying anything could have washed up down there. They ask about the EPA probe taking longer than usual and bring up the girl reporting her grandfather was killed by a monster, and every time the commissioner has an excuse. Finally, AJ's had enough, and he goes off on him, throwing the commissioner's briefcase to the ground and saying he'll just go to the newspapers himself. When Bosch and the other men pick up all the papers AJ threw around, he sees one marked CHUD, and he asks about it. After denying a few times, he eventually fesses up. So it turns out that there's some toxic waste that they wanted to move out of the city, but the environmentalists didn't want it being moved through the streets. So the commissioner kept it under the streets, where it's been piling up for years. Eventually, this toxic waste seemed to mutate the people living down there into cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers, or CHUDs. While these guys figure out what to do about the cannibals living under the streets, Cooper's out living the good life, about to become a father. That's when he meets Murphy, a reporter that knows of his reputation with the homeless people, and he knows that something is up in the sewers. At first, Cooper wants nothing to do with it, but eventually he agrees to go down there and guide him around. While they're down there in the sewers looking for evidence of a CHUD, the police go down there with flamethrowers, ready to attack anything that moves. And, well, they don't do a very good job. They're attacked and their camera cuts out. Knowing that the commissioner plans on getting rid of these creatures by pumping gas into the sewers, Bosch goes to AJ to warn him. He does have a direct path to the sewers after all. AJ goes down to try to get his friends out, which at this point it seems to only be Val, the crazy guy from before. He goes to get him to the surface, but then the door closes in on him, knocking him out cold and locking AJ down there, where gas could be coming in at any second. At the other end of the street, George and Murphy are still digging around when Murphy gets attacked. George tries to help, but there's nothing he can do, and a CHUD claims another victim. Deeper in the sewer, AJ's wandering around when he stumbles upon the CHUDs doing something. Maybe it's a CHUD rave. Anyway, they catch him and he takes off. George is still wandering around looking for an exit, finding all of the CHUD's handiwork as he goes. He eventually finds his old pal Victor, but it looks like he's starting to turn and he attacks. George shoots him, and that takes care of that. But then Victor's sister comes in to get revenge. It's not looking good for George. How's he going to get out of this one? Suddenly, AJ shows up to save the day. He takes out Mrs. Monroe, and the two team up to get out of there. Eventually, they do find the toxic waste dump site, and the guys are able to put everything together. This is where the commissioner's been storing all the waste and blah blah blah, greedy political figure, you know how it goes. They do figure out something interesting written on the side of one of the crates, however. CHUD. But this time, we learned what it really stands for. Contamination Hazard Urban Disposal. It kind of makes me wonder, what came first? Like, were they writing this movie and they knew they wanted to call the creatures a CHUD? So they had to come up with a pretty cool acronym, and someone was like, hey, how about Contamination Hazard Urban Disposal? And another guy was like, no, that's not good enough. Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dweller. And no one could really decide which was better, so they just wrote both of them in. At least, that's what I think happened. Anyway, with that revelation out of the way, we can move on. And it looks like the CHUDs are starting to surface. One of them into Lauren's apartment. She blinds the creature with some of her husband's photochemicals and then cuts its head off with a sword. I'm not gonna lie, that was cool. Lauren seems to be able to handle herself. Someone who can't handle themselves is John Goodman. Yeah, this is one of his earliest roles. Here, a CHUD attacks the diner he's eating at, and it left no survivors. But now, there's no hiding it. The reporters and civilians flood in to try to understand what happened here. So the commissioner moves on with his plan to flood the sewers with gas and blow them up. And with no time to waste, they start right away. But remember, our heroes are still stuck down there. Eventually, they find some of the camera gear left behind by the police crew, and they're able to call Bosch for help. He tells them to go to a manhole that's just around the corner, and he'll meet him there. But, of course, there's a truck on it. The one with the keys? Well, it's the commissioner. After a little back and forth, Bosch gets the keys by punching him in the face. He moves the truck, and the guys are able to make their escape. But here comes the commish, and he guns down Bosch. He turns around and goes after AJ and Cooper. I guess he's just gonna try and run them over. As he speeds closer and closer, AJ fires at him and finally takes him out as the truck crashes and bursts into flames. Bosch says, nice shot, so hey, I guess he's still alive. And Cooper reunites with his wife, giving her a big belly hug. But remember, he was just in radioactive tunnels, literally touching toxic waste, and now he's touching his pregnant wife. Bad idea, bro. And that was CHUD, a fun 80s mutant monster movie. What's not to like about it? It's got great atmosphere, great music, great acting, and a great name, CHUD. I really like the creature costume. The best we see of it is when Lauren cuts its head off, and boy does that not disappoint. Obviously this movie has big B-movie vibes, and at first the box office reflected this. But over the years, it's gained a huge cult following. I gotta hand it to John Hurd and Daniel Stern. All the acting is good in this movie, but I'll never watch Home Alone again without thinking about CHUD. If you haven't seen this movie, then watch it. It has its silly moments, that's for sure. The plot isn't confusing, but there is a lot going on. It's not just some monsters living under the streets like other movies. There's government cover-ups, toxic waste, the homeless population, and of course, CHUDs. I have to say it just one last time. CHUD. 3 cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers out of 4.